Welcome to the Pigskin Party Podcast, the only podcast that combines real NFL analysis with a splash of pop culture and a dash of the random. Let's get this Pigskin Party started with your hosts, Brian McFadden, Will Southard, and Tommy Yu.
Welcome back to the PPP presented by Legit Football. It's time for the flavor of the week. My name is Brian. Please subscribe and tell a friend so we can keep growing this Pigskin Party. If you listen to the main episode, you'll know that Will was not on at the start, never made it on despite what he claimed were his best efforts. But Tommy's still here. Tommy, what should we do about this situation? I mean, we're paying him absolutely nothing, and yet he doesn't make any effort to come on the show.
I just want everyone to know that I've been consistently listening, that I have always been loyal. I will never let you down, and I've been at every show. Sometimes Brian takes a vacation. Sometimes Will's getting murdered in a hotel. But, you know, you have your new boy here, Tommy, the Philly trash, staying consistent. So, you know, just trying
Consistent
to
trash.
carry the load, if you will.
Yeah, and in last episode, you actually played both parts. You had a little Will inappropriateness. Apparently, the Ravens are getting neutered by Greg Roman. I mean, these are the kind of things that, maybe Will, maybe you can stay on your work trip a little bit longer because you know what? Tommy's got you covered. All right, let's go ahead and bring in our guest. We do have a different guest off the main episode. We've got Corbin K. Smith, who covers the Seahawks for Sports Illustrated and is the host of the Locked On Seahawks podcast. So we're going to do a deep dive. We normally do our deep dives for the main episode, but we're going to do it on the flavor of the week this week. We've had multiple Locked On hosts before, and we're in awe of the fact that they do that daily. We do it once a week, and it's already, a handful. So, Corbin, thanks for coming on the show. How you doing, man?
I'm good. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Sure. So, as we mentioned, we are going to go deep on the Seattle Seahawks. We are almost done with our team deep dives. I believe we only have 2 teams left to cover. And the main episodes, we are doing our division previews. We are getting close to the regular season. Camps are happening. This episode is dropping on Friday, which means every team will have started their camp by the time you are listening to this. It's an exciting time to be an NFL fan. But as always, whether you're an old listener or a new listener, we just had a nearly hour-and-a-half episode talking about the AFC North, going deep on all the crazy news around Rodgers and Watson today. I need to cleanse. Tommy certainly needs a cleanse, and I'm sure that if you're listening, you do as well. So we're going to start with our Palate Cleanser. I let Tommy pick the topic this week, and for those that have listened to more than one episode of the Flavor of the Week, you know that Tommy doesn't really know pop culture, which is crazy for an Asian guy, but alas, that is what we're dealing with. So I'm like, you know what, Tommy? Normally, we just make fun of the fact that you don't know what movie or TV show we're going to talk about. Why don't you pick the topic this week? And Tommy, what's our Palate Cleanser topic for today?
You know, I got to put it back in my wheelhouse. Although I may not watch a lot of TV shows or movies, I do watch a lot of sports. So, hey, what's the biggest sporting thing that's happening right now? It is the Olympics. I know it's kind of anticlimactic because there we go. It's kind of anticlimactic because they're still calling it Tokyo 2020 because, as we all know, it was supposed to happen in 2020. COVID happened. Moved to 2021. They're still calling it 2020 Tokyo Olympics. So I think it's a little anticlimactic because it's kind of lost its glimmer and shine. And a lot of people are like, oh, wait, yeah, I forgot the Olympics are happening right now, which just kind of does sound odd, but I'm on board. But I thought, hey, what is everyone's favorite summer Olympic event to watch? Even if you haven't watched it all this year, I know everyone probably has a story of their favorite event to watch, or I'm not saying a specific moment, but what is something that you typically gravitate over towards? So, just to change things up and give Corbin a little time to think, Brian, I'll throw that over to you, actually. What is your favorite events? What do you typically click on and say, oh, wait, I don't want to miss this event? Or you're flipping through channel and you see this event, you're like, oh, okay, hold on, I want to watch this.
So my answer is not purely personal, and it's because my wife hates sports. Football. Detests it. I've mentioned on
and
this podcast
And then you make a
before.
podcast covering sports.
Oh, yeah. Don't get me started on that. She lets me do it one night a week. Locked On, forget it. They would never hire me. I can't squeeze 5 nights out of my wife. But she loves the Olympics and specifically loves women's gymnastics. So because over the past, I've been with my wife nearly 20 years. So the fact that this is the one sporting event every 4 years that I get to watch with her, I'm a women's gymnastics fan, and I am not ashamed to say it. It doesn't hurt that women's gymnastics has been the top of the world for the last decade. So, hey, I picked a winner. I'm going to ride that horse as long as I can. But in reality, even comparing to the men's gymnastics is, yeah, it's strong, but it's not beautiful. It doesn't have this kind of effervescence to it, this just beauty that is not just the tricks, which are impressive, and Simone Biles, the things she does as a human is astounding from an athletic standpoint. It's just the events, the way they do it, it's just so much more entertaining than the men's gymnastics. And the fact that my wife is super into it, like gripping like at the TV, like, oh, they're going to hit the move. And she's like, oh, if they fall, forget it. She like shrieks and, starts to cry. It's crazy. This woman doesn't like sports. So I think I've grown attached to that because of her. We watch it together. It's something we can experience. We also, just to throw a few other, swimming, we like watching the swimming, especially when Phelps was on there setting all those records. I'll watch stuff like, volleyball if it's on. Just the Olympics, right? It's different countries. I was watching skateboarding. My 7-year-old son was loving the skateboarding last night. And that maybe he gets into skateboarding now. So yeah, but above all, if I only had to pick one, it's going to be women's gymnastics. Tommy, what about you? We'll throw it back to you, and then we'll circle around and see what Corbin thinks on Summer Olympics.
You picked a lot of great ones, similar to like what you said. My wife's favorite event is actually women's gymnastics, so much to the point where 5 years ago, I should say now, when that amazing American women's gymnastics team won all those golds, they actually went on tour, and they stopped in Kansas City when we still lived there, and we actually went to go watch them. I got to see, that beautiful team do fun routines. It was a blast. But for me personally, it's not that I don't enjoy watching it. I don't know what I'm watching. Like, unless it's blatantly obvious where they're on the balance beam and they're like, whoa, I'm like, yep, they weren't supposed to do that. And other times they do beautiful flips and they land. I'm like, oh, they nailed it. And the commentator's like, oh, yeah, this is going to be 0.3 off if you look at the foot placement. I'm just like, bro, you got to put it in slow motion to deduct points at that point. What's the point? Anyway, so I definitely appreciate the athleticism and finesse and art that comes with women's gymnastics, but I would be lying if I said that was my favorite, because I do enjoy watching, but I don't know what I'm watching. Whereas my favorite event, it's kind of a cop-out because it was my first love. It is soccer, or football, if you will. I love the World Cup. I love MLS. I love watching, of course, the Premier League, La Liga. I like watching all of it. So kind of seeing everyone come together for the Olympics. I feel like it's of course not as great as the World Cup, because to me that's like the pinnacle, but still
even I watch the World Cup and I don't like soccer. So
exactly,
yeah,
right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of the degenerate in me saying, oh man, I want to see any international football / soccer, whatever you want to call it, games. And so whenever I could get a taste of it, I'll watch it. And so I'm the type of guy who'll wake up early on like Saturday, Sundays to watch my favorite Premier League team play and things like that. And so if I have an opportunity now to watch it on the Olympic stage, I'm like, okay, come on, why wouldn't I watch this? And of course, another side of me also says one more sport is, I guess, basketball, because America used to dominate. And yeah, I said used
Not
to,
anymore.
we're getting, oh yeah, I know, dude, we're getting smashed.
They keep losing.
Like, it's
what
all
happened
we're
to the
doing
dream
is playing
team?
ISO and stuff. And we lost to France. First time we lost, and oh, dude, it's terrible. So right now, I still, of course, enjoy watching.
two of the exhibition games. It's not just France. This is the
third
game.
No. What I'm saying is, yeah, the exhibition games. Everyone's like, oh, that's fine. They're just trying out different things, blah blah. And then what I'm saying is, this was a real game. Now they finally lost, and they lost this huge win streak. I apologize for not having that number on how many games or how many Olympic games or matches that they have won in a row. But now everyone's kind of sitting up and saying,
it was a lot.
yeah, let's say it was a lot. So I do enjoy watching that, only because it's usually fun to see all these, like, there's the All-Star game, then there's like the dream team back like in the 90s. And of course, we haven't replicated that, and a lot of basketball, professional basketball players don't really take the Olympics very seriously because they don't want to risk injury and all that other stuff. So I definitely don't mind that.
Why'd they sign up? Why are you representing your country? Opt out if that's a thing.
Yeah. So all I'm saying is, yeah, that's also fun. But at the end of the day, nothing beats soccer for me personally.
I will say we do have a few regular French listeners, so congrats. France beat the U.S. I'll give you guys the credit that you deserve there, all right? Let's not just harp on how bad the American team has been playing. Corbin, okay, we have given you a little time to give it some thoughts. As part of our palate cleanser question, what would you say your favorite Summer Olympic sport is?
I'll admit, the Olympics have kind of lost their mystique the last 4 to 8 years for me personally. I used to watch it a lot more than what I do. To be honest, I haven't watched any of it to this point, in part because football season's coming up and I'm extremely excited about that. But
we're with you on the priorities, trust
for me. I've always enjoyed witnessing the greatness that is sprinters. When you're watching 100 meter, 200 meter, I think the most impressive is when they're running the 400, because you're talking about combining speed and stamina. And to me, those are phenomenal athletes. The 4x100, and also the football guy in me loves watching those because there's always players or always runners from other countries that I'm like, I wonder what they'd look like in pads when you see them running around. Because a lot of those guys they're built. I mean, they're not tiny little guys. They've got muscle on them and look like they could play. So for me, that's always been the most interesting sport. Basketball I enjoyed watching, but I can watch the NBA for a big chunk of the year, college basketball for a big chunk of the year. To me, that's not a draw for something that I don't normally see. So it's hard for me to put basketball in there, but I would say there's a few swimming events I enjoy, but really the sprinting events are probably the most fun. Sometimes stuff like watching the shot put can be really interesting too, seeing how far that they can throw it. But otherwise, I've kind of gotten to the point where I haven't watched a lot of those Olympic events. Gymnastics is interesting, but I can't tell you the last time that I watched it, unfortunately. But it just feels like it's an event that, especially this year, it's really hard. Excuse me. It's really hard to get excited when there are no fans in the stands. And it's weird saying that because I covered NFL games like that last year. But
which was still weird. Covering the NFL games, that was very
surreal.
weird. Yeah.
You couldn't. It was one of those things you could never get used to, especially being at Lumen Field, formerly CenturyLink Field for the Seahawks.
Known for
one of
its
the loudest,
noise.
if not the loudest, football stadiums in the league.
Home of the 12th
and
man.
Not having a single fan in there, it was just really weird. But the Olympics just takes that to another level. Talking about athletes from all over the world and not having anybody there to cheer them on. It's just, it takes that bizarreness to a whole other level as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I'm with you. Like I said, if my wife was not into the gymnastics, I don't think I would be paying as much attention to this one in particular. If I didn't love football so much, I wouldn't have been watching the games with no one in the stands because it took something out of it. Excited to see fans in the stands. Here's a quick track story. So I ran one track meet in high school, and the reason I only ran one is because and by the way, I have no idea why I signed up for track, probably for a girl. But I trained for the 400, for whatever reason, missed my call for the 400, and my coach said, "Oh, just run the 800. It'll be fine. It's the same thing with 2 laps." So I'm like booking it. I'm in second place, and I wasn't that fast. That speed is not my thing. I'm like, "Oh, this is nothing." Yeah, I finished in dead last because about another quarter of a lap after the 400, I just the tank was empty, and I was just done. Like I hit a brick wall, and everybody's passing me, and just embarrassing. So yes, I too, Corbin.
Look at this loser. He burned out real
Pretty
quick.
much.
He doesn't know how to run an 800.
I finished. I went
You
right
weren't
to
gonna
the car.
catch me running 800, man. And I was a big running
I didn't
back.
know any better.
400's far enough for me.
It was. I did not know any better. As soon as I finished that second lap, I went to the car. My mom was there. I got in the car, and I never ran track again. So on that note.
No, I
Okay,
just want
go
to add
ahead,
real
Tommy.
quick. They just added skateboarding, as you have mentioned that your son loves watching the Olympics. So, Corbin, it's just a matter of time before they put American football in the Olympics, huh? Think of that scene. Just get our all-pro roster, put that into the Olympics. Aaron Rodgers, throwing away like Croatian offensive line. That would be hilarious.
You want to talk about a sport? I mean, I know that it's getting more global, but that is a purely American sport. So the chance of that happening anytime soon. Now,
that would be
maybe by the year 3000, if the Olympics still exist.
Alabama could just send their squad as an Olympic
I think the
team.
Olympics will exist, but I don't know that they'll exist the way that they have been the last 100+ years. I think there's going to be reform at some point where some of these cities are going to be like, this is not worth my investment. So maybe they pick a handful of cities that they rotate between or something, but maybe by like 3000 it'll be we'll have enough football teams across the world that I always thought it would be interesting to like start teaching young people to play football in other countries and like try to build a powerhouse to like we're going to turn the Greeks into football gods. I always thought that'd be kind of fun, but it hasn't grown enough to where a lot of these other countries are actively playing it. They enjoy watching it, but playing it's a different story.
But there is a lot of international outreach, specifically in Europe. We've heard some news reports that Germany is kind of the next ground that they want to potentially have games. They've had a number of games in London. Long term, we could be seeing multiple cities and countries across the world with NFL. To me, that's exciting, just because to me there's no such thing as too much NFL. And Tommy, before you like Will, interrupt my segue again unless you have a really good point. Okay, good.
I
so
do,
let's move
but
on.
I'll hold it.
Okay. You're playing the Will role perfectly. And if he listens to this, which we know he won't, then he would be proud. All right, so let's go ahead. I am definitely feeling cleansed. Watch the Olympics, people. Somebody has to. Nobody's watching in the stands. Let's watch some Olympics this year. All right, let's move on to our flavor of the week topic of the week, which is brought to you by Legit Football. Legit Football, the top 5 NFL stories for free, direct to your inbox every single morning. Make sure to sign up and subscribe at legitfootball.com. You can look for a link in the episode description. So our flavor of the week topic is a team deep dive. There's been maybe 2 other times where we've done a team deep dive on a flavor of the week instead of a main episode, this being one of them. We're super excited to have Corbin on, who covers the Seahawks in multiple facets every day for the Locked On Seahawks podcast, as well as for Sports Illustrated. So what we're going to start with, Corbin, we always start with our guests with asking, what were your thoughts on the 2020 season for Seattle?
It really was a tale of 2 seasons. I don't know if I've ever seen a football team that took a 180 on both sides of the football the way that the Seahawks did last year, because you could make an argument the Seahawks were the worst defense that we've ever seen the first 8 weeks of the season, at least in terms of passing yards. They were giving up more than 350 passing yards per game in the first 9 weeks. They would have beaten the Green Bay Packers, who were the record holder, by over 1,000 yards, passing yards given up, if they would have maintained that pace. But they really turned things around in the second half. The last 8 games, they only gave up 15 points per game. They were a totally different defense, in part because they got healthier, chemistry got better. Carlos Dunlap was great for them up front after they acquired him from the Bengals. But I
feel like they learned to use Jamal Adams better in the second half of the season.
Yeah, Adams, it was really just comfort and being healthy. I mean, and here's the thing, he really wasn't that healthy. He was still dealing with some injuries, but he was much more comfortable with their scheme. You got to remember, we're talking right now on the 1-year anniversary of that trade. He arrived late, and you didn't have your normal offseason program. You didn't have a normal training camp. So chemistry was really difficult to build for teams that had big changes like that. So the offensive side of the ball, though, was the exact opposite. Russell Wilson was on pace for about 1 billion touchdowns, 6 games into the season, just unstoppable. DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett just torching opponents. And then week 7, week 8 range, Russell Wilson randomly started throwing a bunch of picks, which just is not characteristic of him. He's normally really good at taking care of the football, and they kind of took the foot off the pedal a little bit, trying to ease back on some of those turnovers. And next thing you know, they were a pedestrian offense the entire second half. It was the longest slump of Russell Wilson's career, and that's really what created a lot of the drama that we saw between Wilson and the Seahawks this offseason. They've got a new offensive coordinator now. They made some significant personnel changes around him as well. So they're hoping they can get the offense clicking the way it was last year. If they could have put that offense they had in the first half with the defense in the second half, they should have been a Super Bowl favorite. But they just couldn't figure out how to get both sides of the ball playing well at the same time. And they still got to 12-4. That's a successful season, but this team needs to advance in the playoffs, and they have not been able to do that since the last time they were in the Super Bowl. Barely have been able to get past the wild card round. Only 2 visits to the divisional round. They have not been able to get past that. Another reason Russell Wilson's so frustrated.
Well, do you have any ideas of what could have, like, if you had to hypothesize on what exactly changed, right? They wanted to let Russ cook. They let him cook. He was airing it out. The offense was doing great. Defense got better as the year, and then the offense just looked, like you said, that's very uncharacteristic. If it's one thing that Russell Wilson's always been good at, it's protecting the football, making smart decisions that seemed to go away as the season went on. Do you think it was maybe he was too worn out, it was too much, and he just tried to dial in, or maybe he got a little ahead of himself and was just trying to do too much? What's your thoughts on why that change happened?
I think there were a number of factors at play here. There's not any one person that you can blame, but I definitely think number 3 had something to do with the cooking not being near as good in the second half. He became indecisive, and maybe part of that's the coaching staff saying, hey, you got to stop throwing picks. Maybe he was pressing a little bit, but he wasn't taking what was in front of him in the middle of the field, and it just seemed like that short to intermediate game was not there for them. They didn't have a third target that emerged behind Metcalf and Lockett. It made it easier for defenses to take away the deep ball. And Brian Schotnheimer, their offensive coordinator, I honestly thought that he was one of the best offensive coordinators in football the first half last year, but he did not make the adjustments that were necessary in the second half. And there had been times earlier in his time in Seattle where there were questions about his ability to adjust. And I think that's the big reason why he was fired and they replaced him with Shane Waldron. So I really think those were the two biggest factors. The one factor that I don't think was really a major impact on that performance that a lot of people have just, it's really easy to point to the offensive line because of all the issues Seattle's had over the years protecting Russell Wilson. But I thought that last year was one of the best performances they've had from their O-line in the Pete Carroll era. They had some injuries late in the year that made that line perform a little bit worse than the first 3 quarters of the season. But this group still was pretty good, and for the most part, they protected Russell Wilson. So I don't think the line deserved the blame. I think the quarterback needs to shoulder some of the blame for those issues. They had a few injuries. The receivers, they did have a third guy step up. That's why they drafted Dwayne Eskridge. They signed Gerald Everett this offseason. Let's get some upgrades behind Metcalf and Lockett and give a more well-rounded passing attack for Russell Wilson. Let's go get Gabe Jackson as one more piece to put on that offensive line. So they feel they've got the foundation now around Russell Wilson. The big key, Shane Waldron, is he going to be able to make this an offense that can attack all types of defenses? Brian Schotnheimer was simply not able to do that. That failure is what led to his ouster.
And they're going to be facing some tough defenses in the NFC West with the Rams, if the Niners coming back healthy, even the Cardinals, if Chandler Jones is still there, but adding J.J. Watt, adding Zaven Collins, Isaiah Simmons coming into his second season. So yeah, that offense is Waldron is really, I think you hit it, is the big question mark. That's the unknown. Like, is he going to be able to be the right play caller to take advantage of all these weapons that Seattle has? Tommy, you have any questions for Corbin on the Seahawks?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm kind of interested to hear. I know you said that Schottenheimer, I was kind of on the same boat as you. He was esteemed as a great offensive coordinator when he was letting Russ cook. It wasn't necessarily just Russ making something happen out of nothing. There was a lot in front of him that happened because of the concepts that Schottenheimer was able to weave into the system. And I know you said he didn't make good adjustments, which is obviously kind of start to fall apart. Some of that could have been also due to Russ maybe being indecisive or whatever they told him to do. But now
Pete Carroll getting involved too. That's the other factor I didn't mention.
Exactly.
I don't know how much he meddled, but he admitted that he got involved with things a little bit. So
for sure. And now he is out of town, and I've been getting mixed signals, at least on my end. It looks like Pete Carroll wants to run the ball more. Russ is getting frustrated because he wants to throw more, even though he is aware of what kind of happened last season when he was cooking, he was on fire, and it started to fall off. So what direction do you anticipate the Seahawks offense going and things like that? I know there's a lot of personnel moves where you could kind of make a prediction, but what does your gut tell you?
I think that they're going to be more pass heavy than what they would have been in most of the Pete Carroll era. I don't know if it's like early last season, but I just think it's going to be a different type of passing attack. Now, Shane Waldron the Rams have some good receivers, but they never had a DK Metcalf, who is just unguardable on deep balls because there's never been a receiver that's chiseled from rock like that man. They can run a 4-3-3. And so there are different players there. I expect they are still going to take plenty of shots, and Pete Carroll's not going to be happy if they're not. He wants to have those shots downfield, and that's Russell Wilson's greatest strength as a quarterback. He's got a beautiful deep ball. So you still want to do that. Where Shane Waldron can really take this offense to the next level is his ability to coordinate the short to intermediate passing game and incorporate some tempo into the offense. That has been one of the key words all the players and coaches have talked about this offseason. They want better tempo. So if they're able to do those two things, quick passing game's naturally going to help your pass protection issues if that's something that you perceive to be a problem, especially when you've got to deal with Aaron Donald twice a year, or Chandler Jones if he's still there twice a year, J.J. Watt, all the talent that is on opposing defensive lines in this division. You can negate that with a quick strike passing game, but that has never been something that Russell Wilson has necessarily been consistent with. He loves those deep shots, so that's going to be the big key for Shane Waldron. As far as the run game goes, I am expecting that maybe compared to last year, they're going to lean a bit more in the ground game because the Rams have ran the ball quite a bit. I'm not expecting Sean McVay 2.0 with Waldron. I think there will be some meshing of previous Seahawks offenses with what Waldron wants to do, but more wide zone, more under center runs, things like that are similar to the Rams offense. I expect to see that type of stuff. And if the run game is working, then obviously they're going to keep riding it. We've seen the Rams do that under Sean McVay. And so Pete Carroll's never going to be a coach who's like, let's just air raid this. Let's just sling it all over the yard. That's never going to happen. But I think he knows the talent. He's got a quarterback, and there is pressure here because of this offseason too. You don't want to upset Russell Wilson, even if they're winning games, by running the ball too much and not letting him be the feature of the offense. He wants to win, though. So I guess if they did that and they got to a Super Bowl, then he'd be totally fine. But I think that this team's best bet to get that far, they got to have number 3 throwing at the top of his game and letting him throw the ball more frequently, mix in that short to intermediate passing game. And I think this offense has a chance to really bounce back.
You mentioned some of the personnel additions they made when they added Eskridge in the draft, Gerald Everett, Gabe Jackson on that offensive line. What are some things you think they missed in the offseason, whether it was in free agency or the draft? Where are some weaknesses they didn't address?
I think the 2 biggest question marks coming out of this offseason on offense, it's the center position, because I think a lot of people were under the presumption that Ethan Posick was going to be a 1-year starter and that they were going to move on. There were some guys in free agency they could have looked at. I was told Corey Linsley was somebody that they were going to be in play for, but price tag probably got a little more expensive than they were willing to pay. So top couple centers go off the board fairly quickly in free agency. Then they had a chance when they ended up picking Dwayne Eskridge, which I think is a good pick. I'm not sitting here saying that was a bad pick or that they made the wrong decision, but you had a couple of centers there. You had Creed Humphrey from Oklahoma and Quinn Miners from Wisconsin Whitewater, 2 players that I thought would be excellent fits for Seattle's offensive line that could start right away for them, especially Creed Humphrey. I think he's pro-ready. They ended up passing on both of them and taking Eskridge. So that's a position that's under the microscope. Posick's on a 1-year prove-it deal. 2nd year as a starter. Maybe he takes that big leap and the Seahawks look like geniuses. If he doesn't improve, that might be a decision that backfires on him. On defense, it's got to be the cornerback group because you lost your 2 starters from week 1 last year. Shaquille Griffin's going to Jacksonville. Quentin Dunbar's gone. The Dunbar experiment did not work out in their favor last year anyway, but both their starters from the beginning of the year last year gone. They've got a number of guys that have started a bunch of games. Akella Witherspoon's got more than 30 starts in his career with the 49ers. Pierre Desir has more than 40 starts. Trey Flowers has 37. But none of those guys have ever been Pro Bowlers or consistent starters. All of them have been in and out of their starting job and benched at some point with their respective teams. So they don't really have a surefire starter at that position, at least going into camp. Akella Witherspoon's got that kind of talent. If he can find consistency and stay healthy. They like DJ Reed, who played well in the second half last season. Got to wonder if that was a large enough sample size, though. So there's a lot of question marks. That is a group that could have 2 really good starters come out of it, or it could be a group that could exit training camp like, we are not in good shape here. And it's not like they can go lean on Richard Sherman right now, given his legal issues. Now, maybe that's something they re-explore down the road. But that is definitely a position group on defense that I think is worth watching. If the competition plays out how they hope, and they get a couple of quality starters with the rest of the defense they have, then they should be fine. If they can't get 2 players to emerge that really are quality NFL starters, then they might have a major problem on their hands, especially in today's game where passing the football is emphasized so much.
One question for you I have, Corbin. It might not necessarily be a weakness or something that they missed, but one thing that I would kick myself if I didn't have an opportunity to ask someone of your expertise and knowledge is, do you feel that the running back position in Seattle is equipped for the volume that Pete Carroll would like to have? I absolutely agree that they will be a little bit more, I'm not saying pass heavy because that makes it seem like they're just going to air it out all the time.
Yeah,
they're definitely
not going to be June Jones out there. Let's throw the ball 50 times a game. That's not
I
gonna
think
happen.
when Russ was cooking the first handful of weeks, that is not going to be what we're going to get, but definitely passing more than what a lot of people think. People think Pete Carroll is going to go back to the Stone Ages where he run it to the ground, but my question really stems from the fact that, yes, you guys got Chris Carson back, but behind him is Rashad Penny, question mark for me, Travis Homer, DJ Dallas, like a lot of decent depth running backs, but Chris Carson, just how violent he runs. I love watching it. He's one of the most underrated backs in the league, but just the way he runs, especially with 17 games now, makes me wonder, hey, I never want to label anyone injury prone because that, in my opinion, doesn't exist. But just his violent style plus the volume that I feel like Pete Carroll is going to still want from the running back position. Do you feel like they have what it takes to be able to survive all 17? Or do you envision them maybe signing a vet when the cut days come and they cut someone that they might like more than whatever the free agency pool looks like right now?
Yes, I think they could.
Question mark.
So the reason I answered that way is I could see this going a number of ways. I think when you look at Seattle's depth chart, if you are excluding injuries and you are just looking at pure talent, I really like this running back group. And one name, I don't know if you mentioned it, Alex Collins was one heck of a revival project last year, and he only played in 3 games for him, but he just looked like a different back. It's funny what happens when you're out of the league for a year. He looked like a totally different player, and he's fresh. He doesn't have very many carries the last 2 years. And so he is a guy I would keep a very close eye on because I think he is fully taking advantage of his second NFL life. He fits their scheme well. I think he fits this offensive scheme better than.
Excuse me, I'm going to add Alex Collins on my fantasy team right now, so thank you for that.
So, Alex Collins is a guy to watch. And you mentioned Rashad Penny. This is what has been so difficult watching how his career has unfolded because I hate using the word bust with him because, and you're wearing an Eagles jersey, so you should know this. Before
Tommy knows all about busts.
ACL in 2019. He was, I will say this right now, I think he was really close to bypassing Chris Carson as their starting running back.
Wow.
When they were getting towards December, because he had 129 rushing yards against the Eagles. He had a 58-yard touchdown run where he just looked like he got shot out of a cannon. They don't have another running back on their team that has that extra gear. The next week, he had over 100 all-purpose yards and 2 touchdowns against the Vikings. It looked like this kid had finally arrived. And then the second touch he had in the game against the Rams the next week, and by the way, they were marching right down the field because he had 2 big plays before this. He has a non-contact ACL injury, just a freakish injury.
You hate to see it.
And so I hate using the term injury prone with him because he had no injury issues at San Diego State. He's just had some really bad luck injuries, and so it stinks. He has got 800-something rushing yards in 3 years. He only played 3 games last year because the ACL injury happened late the season before. So you've got to sympathize with the kid because I think he has shown he has the ability. You can see why Seattle looked at him as a first-round guy. I watched him at San Diego State in person, and I thought that guy's a first-round running back. And there were other teams that wanted him. It just hasn't worked out, but I'm going to put this as the caveat for you guys. If he's healthy, he had another knee procedure, a minor one, this offseason. But Pete Carroll seemed to think, if training camp started now, this was last month, like he'll be ready to go. They just didn't force the issue. I still think the talent is in that kid if he can just stay healthy. Him and Chris Carson, you could have one of the best 1-2 punches in the league in terms of talent. It all goes back to the health issue. And Homer and Dallas are quality third down back options. So they've got the pieces there. We've joked about it at OTAs and minicamp, though. It just doesn't seem like they can ever keep more than 2 or 3 of their backs healthy. And that has been a issue since Marshawn Lynch's time ended. Really. They've just not been able to keep backs on the field. So who knows if they can actually get it done. They've got the pieces there to be a really good backfield and have a number of NFL starter quality players. I think they got 3 backs there that could be starters in this league. And DJ Dallas might be a sleeper in that regard too. He only got a little bit of action last year. He doesn't have a lot of burst, but I mean, I generally like this group. It's just, can you keep them healthy? Can you keep them available? So that's the big exclamation, or that's the big caveat here.
That's the big $1 million question.
You just got to keep those guys on the field, and I don't know if they can do it. So. Yep. That could mean they sign somebody, pick somebody off waivers, going to the second part of your question. But, yeah.
Well, to start the offseason, it wasn't Deshaun Watson and it wasn't Aaron Rodgers that got the NFL media going crazy with the rumors. It was Seahawks quarterback Russell Wilson. So we can't bring a Seahawks reporter on without at least talking about that scenario. You and I, we talked a little bit about it before we started recording. But tell us, first of all, your thoughts on what actually went down at the time, and then do you think this could be a scenario that gets revisited in 2022 if Russell Wilson finds himself in a similar scenario, getting sacked too much, seeing the offense break down? Your thoughts?
I've been saying this since the comments were made on the Dan Patrick show a couple days after the Super Bowl that really spawned all of these rumors. I never thought he was going to get dealt this offseason, and I thought a lot of the attention that was paid got overblown. At the same time, his agent's decision to release 4 teams that he would be willing to be traded for, or traded to, waive his no-trade clause, that was very peculiar. I did not understand that strategy if you were not demanding a trade. And he told me, I asked him in a press conference in OTAs, what was the point of that? And he said, I'm not trying to get traded out of here. Everybody that I talked to indicated that this is really not that serious. They're not entertaining trading him. He's going to be the quarterback under center this year. They can't absorb the cap hit even if they wanted to move him. So there were a number of things at play. I think it did get overblown to an extent. But you mentioned 2022. This is very real for Seahawks fans. If this team, God forbid, if they miss the playoffs in that division, it's not completely out of the question because you got a ton of good teams. I could see a team winning 9 or 10 games in that division and missing the playoffs because it's that deep. All 4 teams have playoff
opposite of the NFC
talent.
East.
Yeah, they're the opposite of the NFC. I think there's a few teams in the NFC East that might surprise some people, but it is not near as talented as the NFC West is. And so if Seattle misses the playoffs, then that certainly I would think that immediately enhances speculation that Russell Wilson's out of town. And I think that time he would be forcing the issue. If we're not making the playoffs, this is my legacy we're talking about. If they start the year kind of slow, but then they get their offense going under Shane Waldron, they get hot late, they make the playoffs, and they advance a round, or they get bounced in the first round, but it's a close game. Maybe Russell Wilson looks at it as progress, though. Look what we did with the new coordinator. We're going to be able to just take this another step next year. If you start fast and then you kind of hit a brick wall again towards the end of the season and don't advance, though, I think that he's absolutely going to be trying to force his way out. So I think there's a good chance that this could play out again next year. If the Seahawks can advance in the postseason, if they can get back to the NFC Championship game, they've got the roster to do it. They've got the quarterback. They've got the coaching staff to do it. It just comes down to execution and playing at their best in the postseason. If they're able to do that, then I think number 3 is going to be more than happy to finish his career here. But if they're not able to make progress, then we could very well be back in the situation next offseason. And I think there's going to be a lot more teeth to the rumors when he's only got 2 years left in his contract instead of 3.
Tommy, got any last questions for Corbin before we go to predictions from him?
No, I think overall, I just really genuinely want to ask, does it bring you a lot of happiness, me as a very big Eagles fan, that you guys whoop on the Eagles? Okay, to be fair, almost every team whoops on the Eagles, but the Seahawks specifically, for as long as I can remember, even when I considered the Eagles to be pretty good, anytime I saw Seattle, it wasn't, oh, that's going to be a tough game. It was, oh yeah, Seattle's 100% going to beat them. And even it was against Philadelphia where DK Metcalf broke that rookie receiving record in the playoffs where he just absolutely decimated. What is it with Seattle just absolutely annihilating? I mean, we're supposed to be bird bros, man. What's going on?
So I will say this right now, being a reporter, I don't take rooting interests in the games, but yes, the Seahawks have owned the Eagles, and I'm not sure what that's been about. I don't think Pete Carroll has actually lost to them.
No, I don't think so. I don't think so.
Head coach in 2010, and even the year that the Eagles won the Super Bowl, and the Seahawks didn't make the playoffs that year, but they looked like a Super Bowl team the night they played the Eagles. So every team has that opponent.
Yep.
I could tell you the Rams before this current era where they've been Super Bowl contenders and they were awful. The Jeff Fisher years where 7-9 was a success. Those years, the Seahawks could not beat the Rams for whatever reason. And so every team's got that opponent that they should be able to fare well against, and they just struggle with them. And the Eagles probably have 1 or 2 other teams that are like that too. Seattle's had a number of teams that they've struggled with consistently. Every time they play Jacksonville, they have issues too. I don't know why. The year they lost to them, the Jaguars almost made the Super Bowl. So
even at the Patriots' height and the Dolphins' lowest, the Dolphins always would beat New England in Miami every season.
Yeah, and they were competitive the year that they, I think they went 1-15 that one season. They were competitive both games. Yeah, so It's the NFL. Crazy stuff happens. Some teams just match up well. Some them coaching staffs match up well. Jeff Fisher always seemed like he was ready for whatever Pete Carroll and his staff were going to throw at him. And then the Rams would lose their next 6 games.
Yeah.
And Jeff Fisher would look like he had no idea. He looked like he belonged in a coach's retirement home. So you never know. You never know. So I can't tell you what's been the difference. It always seems like Russell Wilson plays well, and the defense always plays well against the Eagles. So
leave it to Corbin to answer what I would throw as a meme question with beautiful insight and analytical. Oh, man. What a legend, this guy, huh?
He slammed the Eagles, but he did it with style.
He did it in a way to still make me happy. What a guy.
Hey,
there you go, Anthony.
I love
Late
what
on the
they
drop.
did when they won the Super Bowl a few years ago, but it's been a train wreck ever since. So
Everybody
they just gotta hope
except-
Carson Wentz doesn't figure things out, because I have a weird feeling he is going to in Indianapolis.
I do too.
I do too.
That's going to be painful, and Jalen Hurts not so much.
I don't know if he'll be an MVP candidate again, but I could see him returning to top 10, which with the rest of the roster the Colts have,
Exactly.
I can tell you Seahawks fans better be ready, because week 1, that is not a good opponent to have on the schedule on the road.
Are you open against the
That's a
against the Colts?
good-looking
Ow.
football team. If Carson Wentz gets back to even semi 2017
even league
form,
average.
That's a dangerous football
Even league average. I love Brian.
Yeah, with
just
that
throwing
roster,
in shade.
Well, yeah, even if he's league, I mean, because Phillip Rivers wasn't last year. I mean, Phillip
Correct.
Rivers has had a noodle arm for like 6 years, and he's been able to compensate. But I mean, last year, that team could have been a potential threat to the
And he
Kansas City
compensated
Chiefs
with 9
a
kids.
slightly better quarterback. So, if Carson
All right.
Wentz can be that, then they've got every other piece, as far as I'm concerned. That's a good looking team.
So we're going to wrap it up as we do with all of our guests for our team deep dives, and we're going to get some predictions from you. 2021 record, playoff. Tell us your predictions for the Seahawks this coming season.
So I'm not going to disclose my record, because my employer is going to want that prediction
Fair enough.
here before the season gets started. I don't want to get in trouble, but I will give you a ballpark here for what I think the Seahawks need to do to be able to get back to the top of the division. I think it's going to require 12 or 13 wins to win the NFC West, just because it is a gauntlet, and all 4 of those teams have double-digit win talent if things play out right and they stay healthy. So I think 12 or 13 wins, maybe 14, depending on how things play out. But I think the Seahawks have the talent and the pieces to be able to do that. I think anything less than 11 wins from this team would be a monumental disappointment. I really do think they have a better Super Bowl caliber roster right now than they did this time last year. Getting Gabe Jackson, who is a very underrated guard as far as I'm concerned. Somehow he's never been a Pro Bowler, but he's one of the best pass protecting guards in the game. Right. I think he's going to be rejuvenated a bit, actually playing for a contender. The Raiders made the playoffs once in his first 7 seasons. So I think that's going to rejuvenate him some. I think Dwayne Eskridge is going to make an impact right away. I think the pass rush is better. Their linebackers, Jordan Brooks is my sleeper to make the Pro Bowl next to Bobby Wagner. I think Jordan Brooks is going to be a star in this league. When Wagner's ready to retire, it's going to be the Jordan Brooks show. So they've got a lot of intriguing pieces. Their safeties are dynamite with Jamal Adams and Quandre Diggs. So really it just boils down to, is the offense going to be better with Shane Waldron? Are they going to have good cornerback play? And did the decision to keep Ethan Posick at center end up paying off or backfiring on him? To me, those are the roster questions that are still looming over them. But I think this team wins 11-plus games. Not going to give you an exact prediction, but I think it would be a disappointment anything less. They have too much talent for them to finish worse than that, if they're healthy, obviously.
Corbin said the Seahawks are going to win the Super Bowl. You heard it here first on the Pigskin Party podcast. No,
don't put words in my mouth.
Of course not. No, but Corbin, thank you so much for coming on. Obviously, like all these Locked On guests, the knowledge you guys have of your teams, and you're no exception. You really know the Seahawks well. Really appreciate you coming on, putting up with our antics around the Olympics and random sound drops. That's what we do on the Pigskin Party podcast. Love to have you on again. You want to do a little plug for your podcast?
Well, you can find me on Twitter at Corbin Smith NFL. It is Corbin K. Smith, because there's another Corbin Smith that actually only lives like an hour from me that keeps writing NBA articles that upset people, and they always come to me. So I am not. That is Corbin A. Smith. If you have NBA issues, go to him. I don't cover the NBA. So it's Corbin Smith NFL. You can find our podcast, Locked On Seahawks, and all the major podcast providers. Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, the Odyssey app, Stitcher, Spotify, all those places. And you can find my stuff on si.com/Seahawks.
Great. Make sure to check out both his writing and his podcast. Thanks again, Corbin, so much for coming on. Tommy, thanks for potting with me, as always, filling in for Will, who just ended up not showing up at all. Thanks again. Well, quick reminder, we are going to be doing 2 Pigskin Party DFS Fantasy Leagues. We're going to release more details on that next month in anticipation of the season. We'll have one weekly league and 1 season-long league. Don't forget to subscribe, tell your friends, and leave us a 5-star review on iTunes. We are still batting 1,000 on there. We want to keep that going. As long as we keep Will off the show and his inappropriate comments, we have a chance to keep our 5 stars. Check us out on Twitter at @OfficialPPPod. You can watch this on YouTube. Check us out on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok. If you want to join our Discord community, there's a link in the episode description. Don't forget to check out Legit Football at legitfootball.com. Sign up for free for that daily NFL newsletter. And as always, we'll see you next week on the PPP.
Go Birds!
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Pigskin Party Podcast. If you're enjoying the show, please feel free to rate, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. We really appreciate that effort. We'll catch you in the next Pigskin Party.